Captain Jalen Arkov crouched behind the shattered hull of a supply freighter, the metallic tang of scorched metal filling his nostrils. The battlefield of Nova 7 stretched endlessly before him, a chaotic tangle of debris, smoldering craters and blinking, hazard lights that flickered like distant stars trying desperately to survive. Somewhere above, orbital bombardment rumbled like the growl of a cosmic beast, and the occasional whine of a malfunctioning drone made him consider whether his unit had accidentally wandered into a galactic scrapyard instead of a war zone. He adjusted his plasma rifle, fingers sticky with the residue of old rations and coolant leaks, and muttered under his breath, "If anyone asks, yes, I did volunteer for this insanity." The air shimmered with the residual energy of previous skirmishes. Holographic projections of enemy troop formations flickered and vanished like ghosts, and Jalen had learned to distrust every blinking light, except the ones that promised coffee, though those were increasingly rare. He crawled over a twisted piece of armor, narrowly avoiding the mechanical claw of a scavenger drone that clearly had a sense of humor and a vendetta against him personally. "I swear I'm being targeted by the universe itself," he grumbled. It was then that she appeared. At first, he thought it was another hallucination born of fatigue, war, and lack of sleep. She moved through the wreckage with an ease that made zero-gravity maneuvering look clumsy, her long ears arching elegantly behind her head like sculpted silver wings, catching the chaotic light. She looked human if humans occasionally sprouted aerodynamic antennae and glimmered faintly under energy shields. Jalen blinked. Twice. "Great," he muttered. "I'm losing it or I'm about to die in style." She froze when she noticed him, and for a brief, impossibly suspended moment, the battlefield seemed to shrink. The distant explosions were still audible, the smell of ozone still thick, but the universe had folded around this one impossible encounter. Jalen tried to seem calm, which for him meant leaning against the hull and coughing discreetly into his gloved hand. "Nice. Ears," he said, hoping it didn't sound as ridiculous out loud as it did in his head. "Very aerodynamic." Her eyebrow lifted in a way that suggested both amusement and mild horror. "Are you complimenting my ears or mocking them?" she asked, her voice smooth but carrying a musical cadence that Jalen wanted to write down and memorize, though he knew the tactical situation would frown upon it. "Complimenting. Definitely complimenting," he said quickly, waving a hand like a nervous human waving at a potentially hostile alien deity. "They catch the wind, for you know dodging plasma blasts. Science. Tactical advantage." He coughed, realizing he had no idea what tactical advantage long ears might actually offer. "Yeah, totally science." She smiled faintly, and the corners of her eyes glimmered like stars reflecting on a calm sea. "You humans are charmingly incompetent," she said, and Jalen couldn't help but laugh. It was absurd, really. Here they were, in the middle of a firefight that could turn either of them into cosmic confetti, and she was teasing him. That laughter drew attention. A squad of enemy drones clattered toward them, the sort that combined obnoxious AI sarcasm with deadly precision. Jalen ducked instinctively, muttering, "Universe, this is not funny." But she didn't flinch. She raised her hand, and the air around it shimmered in a soft, pulsing glow. The drones wobbled, blinked, and then self-destructed in a spectacular display of rainbow-colored sparks that made Jalen flinch and laugh at the same time. "Well," he said, brushing soot off his armor, "I can officially say I'm dying entertained." She tilted her head, long ears shifting like fine instruments, and floated down beside him, not touching the ground. "I don't usually intervene in human affairs," she said, voice almost conspiratorial, "but you were amusingly desperate. Consider it a gift." He tried to maintain composure, but his helmet fogged slightly as he breathed too quickly. "Amusingly desperate," he repeated. "I like that. Could be my war memoir title. Chapter 1, Amusingly Desperate." Her lips twitched. "You would survive long enough to write a memoir." He shrugged, giving a mock salute. "I'm human. We improvise, mostly survive, occasionally explode dramatically. They moved cautiously through the debris together, a silent partnership forming between sarcastic remarks and dodged hazards. She occasionally gestured to weak structural points in the wreckage, warning him with a quiet, almost imperceptible humor in her tone. He responded by pointing out potential dangers with equally ridiculous hypothetical consequences, like being launched into a nearby nebula and becoming a cosmic meme. At one point, a small gravity anomaly ripped through a nearby crater, sending loose rubble into chaotic orbits. Jalen grabbed onto a hovering crate, trying not to look like a panicked meatball caught in a celestial blender. "Gravity has officially filed a complaint against me," he muttered. Lyria floated past effortlessly, almost skipping through the anomaly like it were a minor inconvenience, and whispered, "It's not gravity, it's your sense of timing." By the time they reached a relatively stable sector of the battlefield, Jalen realized that he wasn't just captivated by her skill or her grace. There was something profoundly absurd and comforting in the way she treated danger with humor, in the way the universe seemed to fold itself around their improbable connection. He also realized, with a sinking mixture of dread and excitement, that falling for her was strictly forbidden, not just by interstellar law, but by common sense, survival instincts, and the kind of galactic sense that usually kept soldiers sane. As they crouched behind another scorched freighter, she offered him a small, enigmatic smile. "You know," she said softly, "the war doesn't seem quite so important when you're laughing mid-explosion." Jalen laughed despite himself, imagining the war as an overgrown bureaucracy, its generals tripping over their own strategies, and the universe watching with a cosmic sense of irony. "I'll take your word for it," he said, "though I think it might be plotting revenge for our insolence." For a fleeting moment, amid the ruins and chaos, Jalen allowed himself to believe that survival wasn't the only prize. Humor, absurdity, and the most impossible kind of companionship could coexist with carnage. Somewhere deep in the stars, the universe was probably smirking at the two of them, a human soldier and an alien woman with impossibly long ears, navigating the battlefield with wit, charm, and reckless curiosity. And Jalen, exhausted and exhilarated, couldn't imagine wanting it any other way. The night stretched on, filled with the distant rumble of war, the soft hum of energy shields, and the quiet, impossible spark of connection that made every scorched hull and errant drone feel like part of a story that was just beginning. Somewhere above, the stars twinkled with cosmic indifference, and Jalen found himself grinning, realizing that falling in love in the middle of a galactic war might be forbidden. But it was also wildly, irresistibly entertaining. Weeks had passed since the chaotic encounter on Nova 7, and Captain Jalen Arkov found himself questioning not just the meaning of war, but also the sanity of a galaxy that encouraged anyone with a pulse to participate in it. His unit had been redeployed to the Outer Rim sector, a region infamous for its unpredictable gravitational anomalies, malfunctioning AI sentries, and the occasional meteor storm with a sense of humor. Jalen's uniform still smelled faintly of scorched metal and recycled fear, and his plasma rifle, though polished, had a dent in the barrel that made it hiss occasionally, like it had opinions of its own. The first time he saw her again, it was aboard a derelict star freighter, the kind of massive, crumbling hulk that looked like it had been abandoned by the universe for purely aesthetic reasons. Lyria was floating mid-corridor, her long ears twitching slightly as if scanning the air for the subtle vibrations of boredom. Though, given the situation, boredom seemed absurdly out of place. She noticed him immediately, but instead of the tense battlefield caution one might expect, she tilted her head and raised an eyebrow in a way that suggested the universe itself had delivered him as a punchline. "You again," she said, her tone amused. "Did you follow me, or is it pure coincidence that a human soldier ends up where chaos is most concentrated?" Jalen shrugged, pretending nonchalance while quietly thinking he might have developed a sixth sense for catastrophic coincidences. "Coincidence," Pure coincidence. I promise. Although if the universe is delivering me as a punchline, I'd like to request a less explosive introduction next time. They navigated the freighter together, careful to avoid collapsed decks, malfunctioning gravity generators, and an army of derelict security drones that had clearly decided Jalen was the funniest thing they had ever seen. At one point, a drone floated toward him, its single lens blinking red. Jalen waved his hands frantically. No, no, no. I'm not a snack. I'm a complicated human with existential issues. Lyria floated past him, flicking her wrist, and the drone exploded in a harmless puff of glittery plasma. Honestly, she said, you humans have the most dramatic fear responses. As they moved deeper into the ship, she began recounting tales of her home planet, Ilyara, where gravity was optional during formal dinners and pets could phase through walls but still demanded belly rubs at inconvenient times. Jalen listened, occasionally interjecting with exaggerated horror at the idea of a cat disappearing through his wall and stealing his socks. I mean, seriously, he said, gesturing with one hand while steadying his plasma rifle with the other. If I can't even trust my socks, how am I supposed to survive a war? Her laughter echoed softly through the metallic corridors, a sound that seemed almost incompatible with the ongoing chaos. Survival, she said, floating just above a gaping hole in the floor, is highly overrated. Adaptation is more entertaining. You humans spend too much time worrying about explosions when a clever maneuver or a well-timed sarcastic comment can achieve the same result. Jalen considered that, realizing that most of his previous life in the military had been spent doing exactly what she was mocking, improvising while trying to survive, and somehow convincing himself that his improvisation had the sheen of strategy. The absurdity of it struck him, and he laughed despite a stray spark from a broken conduit narrowly missing his shoulder. Well, he said, I suppose if I survive long enough, I can call it strategic improvisation. Otherwise, it's just human error with style. At one point, the freighter's gravity generator flickered wildly, sending crates, debris, and both of them floating in a chaotic ballet. Jalen grabbed a crate to avoid smashing into a bulkhead, narrowly missing a protruding support beam. Okay, he said, trying to sound authoritative while tumbling slowly. Note to self. Floating crates are now official battlefield hazards. Hazard level, absurd. Lyria glided past, unbothered, and quipped, You do realize the crates are less dangerous than your commentary. By the time they reached the control room, they were navigating a maze of broken consoles, flickering displays, and the faint smell of ozone that made Jalen's stomach twist. She pointed to a control panel with holographic projections of nearby patrol drones. You see these? She asked. We could disable them with a small energy pulse, or, if you insist, we could create a spectacular distraction that involves sparks, panicked AI, and your trademark sarcasm. He grinned. I vote for the second option, way more dramatic, way more me. What followed was an orchestrated chaos of light and sound. Holographic projections fizzled, energy pulses bounced off control panels, and drones spun in confusion before igniting in harmless, glittering explosions. Jalen moved through the mayhem with Lyria guiding him, their coordinated improvisation turning what should have been a near-death experience into a ridiculous ballet of near misses and dramatic gestures. At one point, he stumbled over a loose cable and landed on a console, groaning. I am the embodiment of tactical elegance. Lyria laughed, her long ears swaying with the motion. Yes, she said, you have perfected the art of accidental heroism. I'm impressed. The adrenaline of survival mixed with humor, creating an unusual intimacy. They shared quiet moments in the freighter's observation deck, floating above a swirling nebula outside the shattered hull. The colors of gas and star dust painted their faces with cosmic patterns, and for a moment the war seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Do you ever wonder, Jalen asked quietly, if all this chaos has any point? Or are we just floating debris in a very dramatic universe? Lyria smiled softly, her luminous eyes reflecting the nebula. Maybe it's not about the point. Maybe it's about what we do while the universe throws debris at us. Humor, curiosity, unexpected companionship. That counts for more than victory or defeat. Jalen felt a pang of recognition, realizing that she was right. Their bond had grown not despite the war, but because of it. The absurdity, the danger, and the impossibly timed laughter. Every spark, every failed maneuver, every sarcastic comment had become a thread weaving them together in a story that the universe might consider inconvenient, but was undeniably theirs. As the freighter's alarms began to signal incoming patrols, Jalen readied his rifle, but there was no panic this time, only a wry grin. "Well," he said, "let's survive again, preferably without me tripping over a console this time." Lyria floated beside him, her long ears brushing a flickering holographic display. "No promises," she said, voice tinged with amusement. "But I will make sure it's spectacular." They moved through the freighter together, improvising, laughing, and surviving, each moment a testament to the strange, forbidden connection growing between them. For Jalen, the war was still present, dangerous and relentless, but now it was tinged with the most unexpected kind of hope. That in the middle of chaos, absurdity and love could thrive, and that sometimes surviving with a grin was its own kind of victory. The war had reached Seraphis 12, a neutral star system whose dense asteroid fields and swirling ion storms made strategic planning feel like juggling flaming comets while blindfolded. Captain Jalen Arkov and Lyria drifted aboard a commandeered scout vessel, navigating through debris fields and patrolling drones with the kind of precision that only came from surviving absurdity together. Jalen's fingers flexed on the control panel, still sticky from the freighter ordeal, while Lyria's long ears twitched in anticipation of electromagnetic fluctuations, reading the subtle quivers of space-time like a musician interpreting a symphony. "Okay," Jalen muttered, scanning the asteroid field through the hollow display. "If we survive this, I vote for a vacation. Somewhere with less exploding drones and more breathable air." "Vacations are overrated," Lyria replied, floating upside down for reasons that made Jalen question physics. "But I'll allow it if you promise not to trip over a sunspot." They had become experts in improvisation, a strange human-alien duo blending his raw instincts with her uncanny ability to manipulate energy fields. The universe seemed determined to challenge them at every turn, but somehow, humor and trust had become their secret weapons. At one point, a rogue AI sentinel lurched from behind an asteroid, its glowing red eye scanning for threats. Jalen spun the console dials frantically, accidentally launching a minor gravity pulse that sent both of them tumbling through the cabin like marbles in zero-G. Lyria floated effortlessly, lightly smacking his helmet with a hover-gloved hand. "You're lucky I find your chaos endearing," she said. "Most of the universe would have turned you into space confetti by now." They reached the central asteroid belt, where the enemy fleet had established a blockade. Jalen peeked over the console, noting dozens of warships bristling with plasma cannons and missile bays. "You know," he said, "if someone asked me yesterday where I'd be today, I'd say probably dead and mildly embarrassed. This is worse." Lyria's eyes glimmered. "Worse for your ego, perhaps, but survivable for us, provided we remain amusingly inventive." The plan, such as it was, relied on improvisation. Jalen would distract the enemy fleet by hacking their communications and broadcasting false tactical orders, while Lyria bent localized energy fields around their vessel to create illusions of phantom ships. As the first signals flickered across enemy channels, Jalen couldn't resist adding a little flair. To the fleet that underestimates human sarcasm, prepare for cosmic chaos. The ship lurched as the fleet scrambled, some ships colliding with debris, others spinning aimlessly as holographic duplicates of their scout vessel appeared and vanished. Amid the chaos, Lyria leaned toward him, her long ears brushing against the console. "You've grown," she said softly. "From frantic improviser to strategic chaos agent. I'm impressed." Jalen smirked, brushing soot off his shoulder. "Thanks, I think, surviving with style, right?" They were almost clear of the blockade when a patrol cruiser dropped out of warp, blocking their path. Jalen froze. Of course. That's how things work. Universe has a sense of irony, and apparently timing. Lyria raised her hand, a soft pulse of energy radiating outward. The cruiser shuddered as its shields flickered and engines hiccuped. Jalen muttered, "That is ridiculously convenient." "Improvisation, my human friend," she said, her tone amused. "You provide the chaos, I provide the improbable physics. Together, we make a very entertaining team." Jalen chuckled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the ship's failing heat regulators. "I think I might actually like this," he admitted. "The chaos, the improbable victories, and, well, you, definitely you." She smiled, and for a brief moment the vast emptiness of space seemed to shrink around them. "Falling in love in the middle of a war," she teased, "is highly inadvisable, but I must admit it suits you." Their vessel burst through the last layer of enemy sensors, entering open space beyond the blockade. Stars streaked past in long trails as they engaged the interdimensional transport prototype Lyria had discovered. Jalen's hands shook with the thrill of survival, exhaustion, and something else entirely, anticipation. "So, where does this take us?" he asked, half expecting her to say a sun or a black hole. "Somewhere safe," she said, eyes glinting. "Somewhere we can be ourselves without constantly dodging death or protocol violations. And if we're lucky, somewhere with breathable air and zero exploding drones." As they engaged the transport, reality shimmered and bent, the stars stretching and twisting in impossible ways. Jalen clutched the console, laughing and yelling at the same time. "I always wanted to travel faster than light. I didn't know it would make me look like a human noodle in zero gravity." Lyria laughed with him, the sound filling the vessel. "You've adapted well," she said, "to absurdity, danger, and me." When the shimmer finally settled, they found themselves in a quiet sector, a cluster of uninhabited worlds bathed in soft starlight. The tension of constant survival eased as Jalen floated in the cabin, realizing that the war, while still raging somewhere out there, had receded for the first time into the background. The endless protocol, the explosions, the necessity to improvise or die, all had shaped him, molded him into someone who could navigate chaos with a sense of humor and a partner he trusted implicitly. He looked at Lyria, her long ears catching the light from the nearby star, her eyes reflecting constellations he had only ever studied in simulations. "You know," he said quietly, "I came into this war thinking I'd just survive. Maybe earn a medal, maybe not explode. And now," she prompted, floating closer. "And now," he said, "I've survived, I've laughed, I've caused a little chaos, and I think I might actually be in love with an alien woman whose ears defy logic and gravity. I also might be the happiest human in a war-torn galaxy." Lyria's smile softened and she reached out, brushing a hand against his shoulder. "And that," she said, "is why the universe allows improbable things to happen. So you can be spectacularly alive, in the most unexpected ways." The hum of the ship systems, the gentle pulse of stars in the distance, and the quiet absence of danger wrapped around them like a fragile blanket. For Jalen, the journey had transformed him. From a soldier defined by orders and fear to a human capable of improvisation, laughter, and love, even in the heart of chaos. The universe remained unpredictable, absurd, and occasionally cruel, but it had also granted him a companion, a confidant, and a reason to believe that survival could be both thrilling and profoundly beautiful. They drifted silently together toward the uncharted edges of the galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly before them, promising more chaos, more laughter, and more improbable adventures. And for the first time, Jalen realized that the war, the universe, and the chaos were no longer merely obstacles. They were the backdrop to a story he would live fully, side by side with an alien woman who had taught him that love, humor, and courage were not mutually exclusive. He smiled, a rare, unburdened smile, and whispered, "Let's see what ridiculousness comes next." Lyria's ears twitched in amusement. "Together," she said, and the stars seemed to wink in agreement. They had survived, they had laughed. And in the middle of a war that spanned galaxies, they had found something far more enduring: each other.